What are
Hey,
the
Todd.
chances? How are you?
It's the two Todds.
Yeah, I know, right?
And Mandy's here too.
Like bookends or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
to see you, buddy.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so Mandy was just a guest maybe about a year and a half ago, and we kind of just started doing some stuff together, doing a feature called Take Your Pick, where we kind of like pit two things against each other. And then it started taking off in gangbusters, and we're like, well, fuck, let's just do a podcast together.
That sounds like fun. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
It's fun. Yeah.
Yep.
And where are you right now, dude?
Vegas.
You're Vegas, yeah.
Living in a guitar center, it looks like. I know, but it's my house, believe it or not.
One more guitar, like what could
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm at a point now where I feel like giving them away as parting gifts when people come over. Hey, just take one of these.
Take your pick.
They're like everywhere. I have the most patient wife on the planet.
I'm sure no one would complain if that were the parting gift from your...
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
So,
Todd, you're a busy guy. Like, you just finished recording with Slash and everybody. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that? Is there
Yeah.
anything you can tell us?
This is the 5th recording as a group. So I joined with Slash 15 years ago. 2010, we started. He had put out a solo album. Had like, let's see, Adam Levine and Lemmy and Iggy Pop and all these people sing. Yeah, exactly. Chris Cornell was on that record.
Remember it well.
Yeah, all these different vocalists. And then he put together a band to take it on the road. Miles Kennedy from Alter Bridge, of course, was the resident vocalist for the tour. He's also on the record. And then we went out. I wasn't sure if it was going to be 3 months of flyouts, those kind of weekend things in some casinos and a few of those kind of things, and then high five, and then we're off in different directions. But it went on for 18 months. I mean, it went on and on and on. And then one day we're just sort of at our wardrobe cases. That was a whole new experience. So there's a wardrobe case at that level. But and he's just kind of like, not even looking at me, just sort of goes, so I think we'll do the next record with the band. And I kind of looked at him, I go, like us? And he goes, yeah. As deep a conversation as it was. So in 2011, we started recording Apocalyptic Love, and then a whole batch of others. By 2016, he had sort of reunited with Axel and Duff. I'm dropping them like first names here, sure. Old pals of mine, although Duff is a friend. But it is one of those things where, even then, basically everything has been sort of a gift of like, oh, okay, we're going to keep doing this. Sure. But by the time Guns came along, it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, high five, see you later. But it kept going. That was 2016. And here we are, 9 years later, and we're still doing it. So next year will be 10 years since Guns sort of reformed. And that's when the record probably will. It may not see the light of day till 2027 at this point, just because we all go exploding off into different directions. But we managed to make the record over the course of this year. We started it at the end of last year and finished it this year. So yeah, it's done. It hasn't been mixed yet. So it's great though. I'm really excited about it.
That first Slash record with all the singers and stuff, like that song for Miles, wasn't it the Back from Cali? You have to carry me.
Yeah.
It's probably the best song on that record.
I would agree with that.
There's Ozzy, there's Cornell, there's right. So it's like almost like
Fergie.
Fergie.
That's right.
Right. Like, how tricky do you think it is for? I mean, you do this too. You do the multiple band thing as well. But like, how tricky is that to juggle? Is it a matter of just like, okay, like here's my schedule, and like hopefully we can make it work?
Pretty much. I mean, it's been really interesting watching Slash. He's kind of an animal that way. Like I literally will get a text from him saying, hey, what are you doing Wednesday? This is like I'm sort of randomly making this up, but it's sort of basically true. He'll be like, what are you doing Wednesday? And I'll be like, whatever. It goes, let's get together. Okay, cool. So just randomly, I'll think to myself, I'll catch that, oh, he's flying in from South Africa or something. And he's going to go right into like, let's get together Wednesday. Like he's out of his mind. And I always make the mistake of looking at like the other guys going like, oh, this will be an easy one. He's totally jet lagged from flying in from South Africa or wherever the hell he's coming from. But he's an animal. He's just like, he just wants to rock all day long. And it's not in some sort of like boneheaded way. It's just very much sort of a goal oriented thing where he sort of has a very a big initiative in mind and what we're doing and all that kind of stuff. So it's really inspiring. It really, I mean, it really sort of lit a fire under me, so that sometimes when I'm kind of like to the point where I sometimes am sitting on my couch watching Take Your Pick, and
Of
I'm thinking to
course.
myself, I bet you Slash is on stage somewhere. I should probably. So it's like blues records and Guns N' Roses and then us. And then, he's always doing, and he's appearing on things. And suddenly he'll appear on the Oscars that last year playing the Barbie song or whatever. It's pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're just as busy. I mean, you've got, the stuff with Slash, but you've also got your own things going on. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of, that never really ends, because I think the fact that there's 365 days in the year. And like I say, I don't spend a lot of time on my couch watching Take Your Pick. So a lot of the time is
Just
spent
every
sort of,
Wednesday. Just every Wednesday.
Wednesdays. When do
well,
we release it?
well,
Wednesdays.
the thing is, I get to do that on airplanes and on buses and things like that too. So in reality, my life is a lot of watching things, but is usually en route to, some other gig or whatever. So we started Toque, the Canadian super group per se. Oh gosh, I don't. You know what? I have to sit down and do the math on that. But it started as such a lark of like charity shows and fun things where Brent Fitz sort of made the sort of challenge of like, what if we just played Canadian rock songs? And I was like, oh, dude, that sounds like fun. Kim Mitchell and April Wine and Take Your Pick. And that rabbit hole just opened up a whole thing that I did not expect to be doing and still doing, and in a lot of ways has more of my attention than almost everything else. Like we suddenly find ourselves like in huge demand all summer long in Canada and starting to be in parts of the US. So it's kind of one of those things where it's the funniest thing, because I've known Corey, the guitar player who plays with Shania Twain and Kelly Clarkson, Reba McEntire. He's been around, but I've known him since we were teenagers. He was sort of the local phenom, that young teenage guitar player who could play the solo to Jump and Crazy Train and all those things that at the time were like, he could play that. And I've known Shane and Brent both since like the late 80s, early 90s, just playing in every dodgy bar across Western Canada. So it's funny to find ourselves in each other's pockets and be grown men running around going like, like let's play Rush, let's play all that stuff. And then we started writing songs and having a lot of fun with that. So that's become a really big focus. On top of that, I do other things. I'm about to go to Europe with some friends of mine. This
Nice.
band that opened for us last year was called Black Sonic Pearls. And I'm going to like Kazakhstan and Romania. I'm going to be doing some acoustic shows while I'm in Europe through different areas and into Italy again. I have a whole chapter of my life that I spend in Italy with Will Hunt from Evanescence. He and I, with our friend Steph Burns, made a record during COVID. A lot happened during COVID where it was kind of like, well, we'll never tour again. And I was like, well, I can make records in this very room. I just sit and make music. And then, yeah, we released a record, and that took me to Europe. 2 times a year, I'll be over in Europe doing that with those guys, and then that turned into acoustic shows, which I've done a lot of those kind of things with Todd. And now it's sort of like, bring it to Europe. Let's do that. Bring it to the UK. That's sort of something we're working on. So it really does feel um, like I remember at the end of 24, I had sort of crawled into the end of 2024 because I was so busy. I was just like crash landed into 2025 going like, okay, this year's going to be a little different. Let's try and take it a little easier. And this year has probably been
Right.
at least almost twice as busy as the last. So it's a good problem to have, because I mean, I've been in this business long enough to know, sometimes the phone stops ringing and and you got to get creative when that happens. So I think I've been pretty good at like taking the phone calls, like someone like Michael Monroe from Hanoi Rocks was just over here earlier this year, and I went out and did an entire run with him. And I'm such a huge fan that I was kind of like, of course I'm going to do this.
Mm.
So I take, you take the calls. Bruce Kulick from Kiss, we're doing stuff together again this year, and that kind of stuff. And then you get to create your own things like those, like Toque and all those kind of things that sort of you plant these little seeds and water them and see which ones take shape and which ones don't, and whatever sort of gets hot, you go, okay, the bat signal goes up in the sky and off I am in Europe playing an acoustic guitar for people who don't speak English, basically.
That's funny. We once talked about, and you said like this feels crazy to say, but I feel like there's still the best of me to come. Do you still feel
Yeah.
like that? Like, and is that why there's like Heroes and Monsters? There's Blackbird Angels. There's Toque. There's
Yeah.
Minefield. You know what I mean? Like, do you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
feel like you constantly have to like better yourself?
I don't know if it's so much that. I just think I'm one of those ridiculous people that still feels like there's really cool stuff still to come. People will say like, you should write a book, and I go, about what? I go, I still feel like the big thing hasn't happened yet, and that's, in some ways that seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but it feels very true at the same time. Like it feels like, I mean, everybody can write it. Some of my favorite stories are the stories of like, of triumph and then challenge and then the return. You know what I mean? Rod Stewart's book is hilarious because it's like, I'm 19 years old and I'm Rod Stewart and I'm Rod Stewart till, and there's no, he got divorced a couple times, but I guess that's kind of rough, but you're Rod Stewart. There's other blondes on the planet that he can, find. But yeah, so there's all, there's all sort of ups and downs. And as I mentioned, like, the phone can stop ringing here and there, but, you become a survivor of sorts. And I feel like, um, it's such a different time. And having been around long enough, I was just saying the other day how interesting it was to have been around long enough to see like the 80s get devoured by the 90s in a very significant sense, and then to be around long enough to have witnessed the real shift from the old model of record company world into the downloading and streaming and all that kind of stuff. So to have been around and watch these two gigantic successions happen, it's so interesting that it's still like, that I'm still in the business, and I live in Las Vegas surrounded by guys. I just played last night with a local show we have here called Rating the Rock Ball. And it's guys from Dio and guys from Whitesnake and guys who played in all kinds of cool stuff. And we just get up and do like a classic rock show, and it's really fun. Um, but a lot of the time, I'm surrounded by people in this town who are playing in some lounge over there. They're playing in Blue Man Group, and they're playing in all these different things. And everybody has a story. Everybody was, oh, we were signed to A&M, insert horrible story here, or, we
Choose your own
released
adventure, the shitty
yeah,
style. Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly. We released some records, and, it just the nature of a business that's as topsy-turvy as they come. And I'm like, dude, you go to work with a guitar in your hands, you own a house, you're raising your family, you are a success story. And that's the way I sort of look at it. I'm like, I'm not one of those people who's sort of like, it has to be this or it's not success. To me, it's like, I am a working musician. Like I feel like every day I put on my apron and I make coffee for people. It just happens to be music. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that maybe I put a hard hat on. That sounds more masculine. I put a hard hat on and I create rock and roll, but
Yeah.
either way, it's sort of like, I feel I can only be grateful for it. That said, I still feel like that there's always, because the future's unwritten. You know what it's like? It's like sometimes, I look at people who write that song and it takes off. So that song doesn't exist today. It gets written tomorrow and it suddenly changes your life. And I've had some of that happen in my life, but you just don't know. And sometimes, a lot of times songs become nothing. They just kind of go off into the ether. And sometimes songs become everything, oh, it's on a soundtrack or whatever, and we've had some luck with that. And the idea is to just keep kind of moving forward.
Right.
good gig.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
I'm all
sure.
right. I'm
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. As long as there's coffee, I'll keep going.
So, Todd, you talked a little bit about being in the business for so long, and you see, the 80s come and go, you see the 90s take over. How has, can you look back at your own creative process and see the changes, or have you been pretty consistent? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's funny with Toque, I just sort of was able to quantify recently what exactly it is about that band that really sort of lit a fire under us. And I think because, a friend of mine once pointed out, you realize that you guys focus on a literally 5-year period of the Canadian rock music scene. I think that was his estimation anyway. And I go, that's interesting. And I thought, well, you know why? That's probably because it's within that 5 years of us just straight up finding music. You know what I mean? Because like anybody, we all grow up and we go, the Beatles are great, or Elvis is awesome. I mean, when your parents' record collections, and then when you start finding your own music. So I found myself really inspired by like going back and finding things that like before I really was, jaded like the rest of us all become in terms of like, this is cool and this is not cool, stuff, what we would call guilty pleasures. Um, I think that I find myself going back and listening to a band like The Babies that John Waite was in, or a lot of that kind of stuff that I would find just like on Solid Gold or something like that. And I wasn't old enough to be a
Wow.
tastemaker enough to go, well, these guys are cool, but those guys aren't.
Right.
Those guys are fake, and those, whatever. And I would just go, I would just love to hear a loud electric guitar and just see a band rock. And I wasn't so much hung up on what kind of haircut anybody had, or anything like that. So, and I think that sort of applies all the way through. I mean, I think it applies whether it's, 1980 or 2030. I think it's kind of like you have to find the joy in music. And I think that, Todd and I have been in this business a long time, and we've seen the best and worst and we could probably all have conversations all day long about why weren't these guys huge? Why wasn't this singer a god? It's just the nature of a business that it's not a 2 + 2 = 4. I always say, if this was a business like a company and I started in the mailroom, I'd be the president of the company by now, just based on the amount of time I put in. But that's not the way this business works. It's sort of like you work your way up, you get sidetracked with something else because that's just and then you kind of find yourself in this weird position of like, well, I never anticipated being in Slash's band. That was never in my crystal ball of like how the future is going to go. But witnessing, like it feels like a lot of it was just all meant to be in terms of watching the 80s kind of get crushed by the 90s in a very kind of brutal way, like where bands were in hockey arenas 2 years ago and now are playing small clubs. And literally having conversations. I remember being part of the Vancouver scene and having conversations like guys going, look, well, I was never really into that stuff. I'm into the Pixies. And I'm going, dude, I saw you with your Skid Row hair. And I know, we all were. We were kids. We were like wearing leather pants and long hair because it was rock and roll,
Yeah.
And then it just changed, and it wasn't really like there wasn't some sort of like, business meeting of us all sitting down, like we need to get these haircuts and all wear these clothes and change our sound. It was just sort of naturally kind of happens because we were really excited, to be honest, and really tired, frankly. The music that was kind of happening was becoming less interesting in a way. And then the exciting things like, say, yeah, Jane's Addiction was happening. And we were going, what is this? And that world started to open and created what the 90s became. But it became a very rigid thing. Like you needed to know the secret handshake. I remember writing Ozzy on my fingers once during the 90s as a joke. And I remember in an article later, it was like, as this, who does this, like, what's this guy's deal? Like Ozzy is, like the Ozzy, the dinosaur of the 70s and 80s. And I was kind of like, oh, dude, relax. It's like, and meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, as if you didn't listen to those records too, brother. But
Right.
but the
Yeah.
thing about that is once we sort of survived through that kind of like secret handshake period, you realize that the Ozzies and all the bands that we sort of loved that really mattered had a longevity that couldn't be discussed based upon like who had the right haircut or who had the right pants on. But that's music. Music is just it's a personal preference and a personal taste. It's all subjective.
Totally.
Mhm.
And it
For
was
sure.
it was Nirvana that kind of really truly blew the 90s into where we are today.
Yeah. I mean, the weird thing about it is in discussing that, my friend plays in Jerry Cantrell's band. And, and I can't, it's hard to put into words how important Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and
Holy
Nirvana,
sound.
yeah, when it happened. But it is objectively now we can all sit and talk about how different those bands are. In reality, a band like Alice or like Soundgarden were sort of the next wave of what metal was. Nirvana sort of came from a sort of independent punk rock kind of thing, and with some pop elements, and Pearl Jam was like, I suppose, a carryover of rock in a different way. And and then when you think about it, it feels like that was, and then that was the law. But it all changes really fast too. For every one of those, there's a million bands that came along in the 90s that aren't around anymore, just like there was a million bands in the 80s that aren't around anymore. And it's been exciting, right? Like recently watching you know, these package deals go out now, and it's like Eve Six and Candlebox and all these bands that sort of, they had a moment,
Yeah.
but they didn't have those Pearl Jam moments, but they had moments, and you could talk about the '80s versions of that too. But it's Marcy Playground, all these kind of bands that had a hit song, or Fastball, bands that
Yeah.
had songs and then just kind of went away. It was just as cutthroat in the 90s. It wasn't like some sort of like Valhalla paradise of like freedom when it came to music. It was still like, it's all based upon the bottom line of how many records you're selling, how many butts and seats you're putting in venues, and it's all the same thing. And it's the same way today. Just that whether it's TikTok or Spotify or whatever it is, it's the same, but it's completely different. you know,
Yeah.
as weird as that is to say.
Yeah. Todd, you said there was that Toque, your band covers like this period of about 5 years from the 80s. What period is that? Like, what bands do you draw inspiration from the most, I guess?
Probably more
Well,
than 5, though. Let's be honest.
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
it,
but
it, it definitely.
You know?
We've stretched it. We've certainly stretched it, but I think our initial focus was a lot because we're all from the prairies. So there was a lot of like Harlequin and Street Heart
right.
and bands like
BTO
that.
and
Bands like that we just we loved, and they were never popular. Well, they're popular, but not like in a sort of national and or universal sense. So, but when we first started doing that, there was a part of me that said to I remember we were riding around in Hollywood with Corey Churko. We were listening to this band called the Queen City Kids from Regina, who we love, who are still the greatest band ever. If you haven't heard them, you should download them and find your new favorite band. But we're riding around Hollywood, and I just thought to myself, looking around at every other car, and I thought to myself, it's so weird that no one else in any of these cars knows this music, but we know every word, every nuance. And there was a part of me that said, I would love to record these songs, these and Orphan from Winnipeg and a few of these bands, and just imagine that somebody in Japan or South America or Europe will hear these songs and go, I love this song. This is great. Because they wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear it in the late 70s, early 80s, or whenever it came out. And that, manifest destiny began to happen where people were going, I love this song, And we have friends from Mexico who are like, they have no concept that these are covers. I go, no, these are not our songs. You got to go back and find the real version. But they just accept them as Toque songs. And I go, so part of that is the cool thing of having guys like Trooper and Loverboy and Helix and Triumph and all these guys become friends of ours. Although we're friendly anyway, but knowing that our love for them, Kim Mitchell, is genuine, and it's a true celebration of that music. Because like any country, whether you're in Australia or Sweden, you'll go to those places and they'll talk about some artist that you've never heard of, but it's like, he's as relevant as the Rolling Stones in that country. And that's what I think is beautiful, because when we go to Canada, we very much have, there's nothing cooler than renting a car, turning on the car and going, oh, 5440. Wow. It's like, I just don't hear it when I'm down here. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's part of the beauty of having a country that has its own sound. And we should, even though I believe that a lot of those bands should have transcended that, but that's based on a million different things. I mean, it's the same as in the 90s when I look back at Edgefest, and it was Our Lady Peace and I Mother Earth and Moist and Matthew Goodband and the Tea Party. And all the bands that were like really high on the bill were all Canadian and crushing it on Much Music. You know what I mean? So when I would go to Toronto as Age of Electric or whatever, the impact in Ontario is way bigger for our band and for our legacy per se than almost anywhere in Canada, because Much Music was such a huge, pop culture thing out there than even across Canada. Although obviously the impact across Canada was there. But the '90s was a very special time for Canadian music as well. Even though a lot of those bands I just mentioned didn't necessarily transcend. Billy Talent is huge in Germany. It's like the weirdest thing how like some bands just transcend and have other things, and then a Sum 41 or a Nickelback are internationally gigantic. So it's you just never know. But at the same time, we have the Trues, we have Canadian bands. It's like the hip Canadian bands.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the CanCon regulations? Like back in the late '60s, early '70s, where they were like, you need to play at least 30% Canadian music on radio stations. I think now it's at 35%. Is it at that point now where it's not super necessary? Like, or is there still merit to having CanCon regulations?
That's a good conversation because I'm a guy who definitely benefited from that. I mean? I think that Age of Electric got a lot of love for that. Static and Stereo got a lot of love for that. So it's really hard for me to be like hypocritical about it and say, oh, they shouldn't have that. But only for me, they should have that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a difficult one. I'm assuming that, like I said before, like whether it's Australia or wherever else, I assume that these countries must have an infrastructure that supports their music as well. I don't know. It's
I'm not
sort of
sure that the States does. Like, I'm not sure that, K
I don't
Rock in
know.
LA is like, you need to play 35% American. Like, of course we're going to play. That's that's our bands, right?
Well, I mean, maybe just without even a conversation about it, they just naturally will support their own music. But I mean, that's why Canada was so beautiful to us, and that's why when I talk about Street Heart and living in Canada, it was like Street Heart, Rolling Stones, AC/DC. To me, they were all the same thing. Like they were all huge. So a band from Australia, a band from the UK, and a band from Canada to me was so it sort of leveled the playing field in that way. I don't know. I don't think it's kind of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation. But at the same time, it's I mean, as well as I do, as you live in this world now, and you don't work within the confines of a radio station. That I don't know how. I mean, obviously, there's still a great deal of power at radio, but I don't know when you're dealing with the internet and streaming and everything else, it sort of changes that entire game. It's a bit of a shame, and I say this only because I remember having Much Music on all day. Like you would just have it playing, and it'd be like Rap City, or I'm not like that guy, but and there'd be pop music playing, and the Spice Girls are playing, and the Backstreet Boys are playing, and Kelly Clarkson, and then there'd be like the rock stuff, and I would just become knowledgeable about kind of everything, whatever was going on, whatever was kind of hip. And now I find with streaming, we get into our cars and Sirius XM or whatever it is, and it's like hair metal or '90s or whatever your jam is. You're just sort of, filtering this exact, your exact algorithm, as opposed to sort of broadening in any way that might be the best thing to do. So and even then, I think that, we all know that radio stations, regular radio stations sort of cater to one thing or another anyway. So, but at least like say CFOX back in the day, I mean, it seemed to be sort of a broader sense of like, here's modern rock, or whatever you want to call it. And it sort of turns you on to everything. I don't know. It's such a difficult thing to crack, because I think that there's great things about it, and when it comes to CanCon, there's obviously great things about it. There's a lot of bands we probably never would have heard of if it wasn't for CanCon. And if
Yeah.
you want to be jaded and cynical about it, there's probably some bands that people don't like that they could say the only reason this band was on the radio. Somebody probably might say that about Age of Electric. The only reason they got anything is because of CanCon. And
Well,
I'd
they're
be like,
fucking
well,
stupid though, Todd. So they don't they don't get it.
yeah, well, I wasn't going to say it.
So speaking of new music, Todd, so what are you listening to these days?
Well, what's so funny to me is it's like, I was just saying the other day how I've become like my father or something, where I remember a long, long time ago when Appetite for Destruction came out, I was playing with these older guys, grown ass men, and I was like the young, hey guys, check out this new thing. And I remember the one guy just kind of going, oh, Alice Cooper already did that. And I remember thinking like, what the hell's he talking about? It's like, but I know that there's a thing that happens that when you've sort of been through listening to a kind of music. Like even now, people will go, check this out. You'll dig this. This is right up your alley. And they'll press play, and I find myself doing the same thing. Well, it's cool, but it's sort of like Zeppelin did this 50 years ago, or whatever. So once in a while, it's something. What I find most of the time is I'm finding like the bands that open for us, or bands that sort of like this band called Freeze the Fall that just opened for Toque in Vancouver,
Yeah.
are from Kelowna, and they're two like very young girls. Well, they're all like from 16, 17, and 18 years old. And it's like, there's something really interesting where, because because I'm the kind of guy that goes like, well, like 10 years ago, the 90s. And it's like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, dude, that was 30 years ago. And you're like, oh shit. So like to a band like that, the Smashing Pumpkins is classic rock because it's classic rock. You know what I'm saying? So when you hear elements of like where someone is their little stew that they've made is like elements of like things I've never heard before. Plus there's that, like, oh, that sort of a Billy Corgan thing going on here, or all that kind of stuff. You just kind of go, wow, that's really interesting to hear. And I think that's when I get excited and I get turned on is when it's something that's sort of a little bit like I went through a phase of like hip hop that it was just simply because I was what ends up happening, and I notice this with my friends who are in film and television, you can't sit down and watch a TV show with your friend and going, did you notice that? That cup was half full a minute. And they'll be pointing out weird like consistency things that are continuity things in TV and film. And you're like, can you just watch the film? The good guy and the bad guy and the girl and
Uh-huh.
just the story of it.
Can't do it.
And they sometimes they just can't pull themselves out. And I think sometimes as a musician, because we're constantly in a mode of like, oh, that's interesting. They went from the bridge into the solo, and you're sort of analyzing literally everything. You're literally kind of like hearing it. Oh, they went to the major third there, not in a real mathematical nerd way. And
Uh-huh.
then for whatever reason, like yesterday, I just like randomly just turned on. Um, I went to YouTube because I was doing whatever I was doing in the house, and I just played a video, and then it started to kind of play like random videos, and then weird things like Something About You by Level 42 came on, and I was like, God damn, this is a song. I was like, I
Classic track.
forgot how incredible this song was. And that kind of thing will happen. And it's like, because I think what's interesting about being around long enough is like songs that you've heard hundreds of times in your life, just like I went through a Bob Dylan phase way later because and Bruce Springsteen, guys like that, where I was kind of like, when I was younger, I kind of didn't get it because I was like into something else, and that just seemed like that seemed my like my uncle or something like that would listen to that kind of music. And
Right.
then later on, you would hear a lyric that would suddenly, because you hadn't really lived life, you hadn't had your heart broken enough times, you hadn't had things happen enough, and then Bruce or Bob or someone would say something, you go, whoa, what did he say, and it just opens this window of stuff that you can't really register with because you haven't had the life experience to connect with it. So in a weird way, I mean, that's why I think some of the newer music that's it can be quite off the beaten path for me, like and then it'll be like, because sometimes the guitar, straight up guitar rock kind of thing, there is a certain degree of like been there, done that, and I don't want to feel like that, but I do feel like that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So sometimes it's kind of like going and finding stuff that's a little different. And like I said, the hip hop thing that, like whether it's Kendrick Lamar or going like, well, I've never heard this before. This guy, white guy from Saskatchewan. Well, I don't know what's going on here. So this is all new to me. And then really like having a whole new appreciation for the ability to rhyme and lyrics and saying heavy things. I was just kind of like, as a guy who has to write words, like it's a job or like, or a punishment. But it's just like you're trying to always say something, but like, have something meaningful. And you're like, oh, wow, this is so effortless for these people. So, but I think
Got
that's
most
kind of,
songs though. Like, let's not kid ourselves here, Todd. You've had songs over the years where they're effortless. Like suddenly that song came out.
well, I mean, that's the funny thing about it. The coolest thing about the Age of Electric, I have to remind myself all the time, was it really was just four snotty kids from Saskatchewan who just, you know, it wasn't until later on that I ended up in a music industry that was a lot more like, you know, like let's write let's write 5 songs and use one. Now write 5 more and use one. And it's just like that kind of treadmill of like record industry producers, songwriters. It's just soul sucking. You know what I mean? Age of Electric was literally like, this is the way we do it. This is what we're gonna do. We would annoy pretty much everybody because we had basically no interest in listening. Like people who knew what they were talking about, we would just be like, yeah, nah, that's not for us. And they, but I'm a really big believer that just because somebody has been involved in some platinum albums, or it's the same with like actors or producers who made Oscar worthy movies. I can go into their Wikipedia page and pull up all the movies that didn't do well, and pull up all the records that didn't do well and all the bands that didn't take off. It's just the nature of like, yeah, if you stick around long enough, you can be lucky enough, and that doesn't take away from the fact that that person has skills or has ears, or a Clive Davis can pick hey, you know what? Barry Manilow, you should sing this song, Mandy. It's like Barry Manilow was a songwriter, and Clive Davis is like, I think you would kill this song. He's like, but I'm a songwriter. I'm going to sing other people's songs. Boom, hit. It's like hit after hit after hit. And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I'm sure I could go into Clive Davis's Wikipedia and find all the things that didn't work. It's just the nature of, it's the wackiness of a business that's, like I said, it's not 2 + 2 = 4. It's a Goodwill Hunting equation on a blackboard that,
Right.
and sometimes it's as simple as 2 + 2 = 4 because it's some band that just, they're just connecting. Nirvana was that kind of thing. Like we saw it in real time where it was kind of like a year later, everybody goes, oh, the first time I heard that, I knew it was going to be a hit. I go, no, you didn't. I was there. That record wasn't even available. It sold out immediately because it just like everybody expected it to sell 50,000 records, but it went on and just exploded because every 14-year-old on the planet went, that's my band,
They
and
saw the
you can't,
video on Much Music and they were like,
Yeah.
yes.
you can't predict that kind of stuff. I think sometimes stuff just happens, and it's happening to this day. If you would have told me, like we would go to Korea with Slash, and there'd be huge displays of BTS and these pop groups, and I'd be like, wow, these guys are huge over here. And then like several years later, all that stuff sort of filters into America, and I'm like, if you would have told me that like K-pop and all that was for no other reason other than it being English second language, it would have a real impact. I was like, there you go. I mean, anything is possible. I mean, there used to be a time where the Asia was excited to have American and Western artists, English artists go over there because it was like, wow, they have their whole own scene going on over there. And it's gigantic, like in Japan and Korea and all that kind of stuff. And it's the beauty of all this is it's like, no one really knows what's going on. I really, even people who've been in the business for a million years, I still look at them and go like, even if you know what's going on right now, tomorrow it's going to be different than today, and the next day is even more different than, and it's sort of evolving. It's ever evolving, and then there's always that thing of like, well, we're not 19 anymore. It's like, yeah, but you know what? We're still playing music. Ringo Starr is 85 or something like that. He's going out and playing shows. So there's no retirement plan. We just keep doing this until basically we can. Well, I was just looking at this. Me and my pal Rick Springfield here, somebody
Oh,
gave me
yeah,
this record. He's 76 or something, and I was
that's
like,
right.
Jesus. I go, that's crazy to me that I find these guys really inspiring because once in a while you'll get down on yourself because you're like a grown ass man still playing music and going like, is there some sort of line in the sand that says like, then someone taps you on the shoulder and goes, thank you for your time. Here's your gold watch. Go sit on the couch and watch, Netflix. And I go, I don't think that happens. I think we just go and go and go until we
Mhm.
can't anymore. Where you're seeing bands like Foreigner, no original members. Skinner, no original members. Trooper
No
in
original.
Canada, no original members. It's kind of like where the music will outlive the band. And I think that's, if we would have talked about that 30 years ago, that'll never happen. We would have been like, that's an outrage. And now it's kind of like, well, I think the music is the important part, and
Yeah.
I think God bless
Right. Todd and I were talking a bit about, the
that
same
Todd.
kind of idea that
This
the other, yeah,
Yeah.
about, just bands having legacies and yeah, it's the music, but it's also the band like Aerosmith now, and they're keeping things fresh by collaborating with Youngblood. And so I think that's kind of to your point that it's something fresh, but it's old at the same time. So it's familiarity for the audience and that kind of thing, right? So
I think that's very common, and I think that's been going on since the beginning of time. I mean, Youngblood's really having a moment. My friend Lauren Elizabeth is a Lauren Ash is her she was an actor on Superstore, but she's from Ontario and she has music out and she's fantastic. Anyway, she turned me on to Youngblood years ago, and I was like, he was a young sort of poppy English guy with guitar kind of stuff, and I go, cool, and I thought he was really, there's the eyeliner and the kind of rock star stuff going on. I go, oh, cool. But I felt like a grown ass man going like, this is not something I was supposed to be listening to. And now, but I remember every time that Rolling Stones would put out a new DVD, it would always be like the Stones would have like Christina Aguilera come out or Justin Timberlake or whoever was the pop star du jour. And it felt like some sort of touchstone of like, yes, we're the Rolling Stones. Yes, we're old as fuck. But here's this, person that's very much today, and they are paying their respect to the Rolling Stones. And I felt like it sort of always felt like a Jack White or whoever would come out and play. And it would be this sort of like, very today while this is going on. So I think an actual collab with Youngblood is pretty clever, even though it raises more questions about what the hell is going on with Aerosmith in terms of the retirement and all the stuff that's been going on. So, but I'm excited if Aerosmith comes back. Hell yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I agree.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Todd.
Thank you guys. Lots of fun.
It was
Looking
great to
forward
meet you.
looking forward to crossing paths in person one of these days.
Yeah, for
Look
sure.
forward to
For
that as
sure.
well.
That'd be great.
Okay, buddy. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you too.
Yep.
Big love.